The gunshot echoed across the vast Montana territory as Zara Turner stumbled through the tall grass, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other desperately holding onto a worn leather satchel. It was 1876, and the summer heat bore down mercilessly as her water broke, panic rising in her chest like a trapped bird. Her husband Thomas was 3 days dead, killed by the same bandits who'd pursued them from Billings, leaving her alone and on the run, miles from the nearest settlement. "Not now," she whispered to her unborn child, her voice ragged with exhaustion. "Please, not now," but her body had other plans. The contractions came stronger, closer together, forcing Zara to her knees in the shadow of a lonely cottonwood tree. At 23, she had traveled west with dreams of a new life, not of becoming a widow giving birth alone in the wilderness. Miles away, Jesse Xavier rode his chestnut mare along the eastern trail, his worn hat pulled low against the setting sun. At 30, he had seen enough of life to know that plans rarely unfolded as expected. The cattle drive had ended early. Diseased stock had forced them to sell in Helena rather than continue to Bozeman. Now he was heading back to his modest ranch, a small patch of land that represented 8 years of back-breaking work. The sound caught his attention, not quite a scream, but a moan carried on the wind. Jesse reined in his horse, listening. Years spent in the wilderness had trained his ears to distinguish between the normal sounds of nature and those that signaled trouble. "Come on, Daisy," he murmured to his mare, turning her toward the sound. "Someone's in trouble." What Jesse found beneath that cottonwood tree would change the course of his life forever. A woman, her dress soaked with sweat and blood, was in the throes of labor. No one else was in sight, just the vast prairie stretching in every direction. "Madam," Jesse called, dismounting quickly. "Madam, can you hear me?" Zara's eyes flew open, terror and pain mingling in her gaze. "Please," she gasped, "don't hurt me." Jesse approached slowly, palms out. "I won't hurt you, I promise. My name's Jesse Xavier. I'm a rancher from over by Silver Creek." He knelt beside her. "Are you alone out here?" Another contraction gripped her, and Zara could only nod, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "The baby's coming," Jesse observed, removing his jacket. "I've helped birth calves, but he swallowed hard. This is different." "My husband," Zara managed between ragged breaths. "Dead 3 days, bandits." Jesse's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, madam, but right now we need to focus on you and that baby." He laid his jacket on the ground. "What's your name?" "Zara Turner," she whispered, before crying out as another contraction seized her. "All right, Zara, I'm going to help you through this." Jesse's voice was steady, belying the fear in his chest. He'd never delivered a human baby, but he knew enough to recognize that she needed help fast. For the next 2 hours, Jesse stayed by Zara's side, offering encouragement, wiping her brow with his bandana dampened from his canteen. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Zara's pain intensified. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can," Jesse insisted, his blue eyes locked on hers. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, bringing a child into this world out here. Now push, Zara, push." With one final desperate effort, Zara delivered her baby into Jesse's waiting hands. The tiny form was silent for one terrifying moment before letting out a lusty cry that seemed to echo across the plains. "It's a boy," Jesse announced, his voice thick with emotion. He quickly cleaned the infant with his spare shirt and wrapped him in his bandana. A strong, healthy boy. Placing the newborn in Zara's trembling arms, Jesse watched as mother and child met for the first time. The tenderness of the moment struck him deeply, reminding him of the family he'd once hoped to have before life had led him down a solitary path. "Thank you," Zara whispered, tears falling freely now. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along," Jesse nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Night's coming and it gets cold out here." "I have nowhere to go," Zara admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down upon her. Jesse looked at the woman and child, so vulnerable in the gathering darkness. "You're not alone now," he said firmly. "You'll never be." Those simple words, spoken from the heart, formed a bond between them that neither could have anticipated. The journey to Jesse's ranch was slow and arduous. He fashioned a travois from branches and his bedroll, creating a makeshift bed for Zara and the infant. They traveled through the night, stopping frequently for Zara to nurse her son, whom she named Daniel Thomas Turner after her father and late husband. Dawn was breaking when the small cabin came into view. It wasn't much a one-room structure with a lean-to stable attached, but to Zara, it looked like salvation. "It's not fancy," Jesse apologized as he helped her inside, "but it's solid, built it myself." "It's perfect," Zara replied, taking in the simple but well-maintained interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a narrow bed stood in the corner, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Jesse quickly set about making Zara comfortable in his bed, building a fire and preparing a simple meal of cornmeal mush and jerky. As Zara rested, he sat in a chair by the fire, holding little Daniel while she slept. "You've got quite a mother," he whispered to the infant. "Bravest woman I ever met." Over the next few days, Jesse made Zara and Daniel as comfortable as possible. He constructed a crude cradle from an old crate, hunted fresh meat, and even rode to a neighboring ranch to barter for milk from their goat. Throughout it all, he maintained a respectful distance, sleeping on a pallet by the fire, giving Zara his bed. On the 5th day, as Zara sat in a chair by the window nursing Daniel, she finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "Why are you helping us?" "You don't know me," Jesse, who had been mending a bridle, looked up with surprise. "Out here, we help each other, it's how we survive." "But you've given up your bed, your food, you've hardly slept," Jesse set the bridle aside. "When I found you, you had nothing and no one. I couldn't just leave you there. Most men would have." "I'm not most men," Jesse replied simply. Zara studied his face, the weathered lines around his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the kindness in his expression. "No," she agreed softly, "you're not." As the weeks passed, they settled into a routine. Jesse would rise before dawn, tend to his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden behind the cabin, while Zara cared for Daniel and managed the domestic tasks. In the evenings, they would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence as the baby slept. Zara learned that Jesse had come west after the war between the states, seeking a fresh start after losing his family's farm in Tennessee. He had worked as a ranch hand, a buffalo hunter, and briefly as a scout for the army before staking his claim on this land. Jesse, in turn, discovered that Zara had been a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania before marrying Thomas, a carpenter with dreams of building a life in the West. They had been on their way to San Francisco when they were attacked. "Thomas always said San Francisco was where fortunes were made," Zara explained one evening. "He wanted to open a furniture shop there." "It's a fine city," Jesse agreed. "Been there once years ago, but it's changed a lot since then, gotten bigger, more crowded." "We'll never know now," Zara said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Those men took everything from us." Jesse hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "Do you think they're still after you?" Zara's fingers tightened around her cup. "I don't know." "They wanted our money, our wagon," Thomas fought back, and her voice trailed off. I ran and hid. When I came back, he was dead and the wagon was gone. I grabbed what I could and just kept running." "You did what you had to do," Jesse assured her. "You protected your child." "I was a coward." "No," Jesse said firmly. "You were brave. You're still being brave." As summer turned to fall, something changed between them. It wasn't sudden, rather, it grew gradually, like the wildflowers that dotted the prairie after a spring rain. Jesse found himself looking forward to the evenings by the fire, to Zara's smile when he returned from tending the herd. Zara discovered that she watched for him from the window, that his presence brought a sense of security she'd thought lost forever. But neither spoke of these feelings. Zara was still in mourning, still wearing the wedding band Thomas had placed on her finger. Jesse respected her grief, never wanting to rush her or take advantage of her vulnerable position. The first snowfall came early that year, blanketing the landscape in white. Jesse had spent the previous weeks preparing chopping wood, smoking meat, preserving vegetables from the garden. The cabin was snug, but the isolation was more noticeable now, with the nearest neighbor a half-day's ride away. It was during the first blizzard of the season that danger found them again. Jesse had just returned from checking on the cattle in the barn when Zara, who was putting Daniel down for a nap, froze by the window. "Jesse," she whispered, her face pale, "there are riders coming." Jesse moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to the rifle mounted above the door. Through the swirling snow, he could make out 3 figures on horseback, approaching slowly. "Get in the root cellar," he instructed, taking down the rifle. "Take Daniel and stay quiet." "Who are they?" "Don't know, could be nothing, could be trouble." He checked that the rifle was loaded. "Either way, I want you hidden." Zara gathered Daniel, who was mercifully asleep, and descended into the small storage space beneath the cabin floor. Jesse closed the trapdoor behind her, covering it with a rag rug. The riders were at the door now. Jesse took a deep breath, adjusted his grip on the rifle, and opened it. 3 men sat on their horses, snow collecting on their shoulders and hats. The one in the center, a barrel-chested man with a scar running down his left cheek, spoke first. "Looking for a woman," he said without preamble. "Young, dark hair, might have had a baby with her." Jesse's expression remained neutral. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Been a while since I've seen anyone at all with this weather." The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions. "Mind if we warm ourselves for a bit? Cold as death out here." Every instinct in Jesse's body screamed danger, but refusing would only raise suspicions. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside. "Coffee's hot." For 20 tense minutes, Jesse played host to the 3 men. They asked casual questions about the area, about his ranch, all while their eyes roamed the cabin, searching. Jesse answered calmly, offering information that was truthful but vague. "Live here alone?" the scarred man asked, warming his hands by the fire. "Yep, just me and the livestock. Must get lonely," Jesse shrugged. "I like the quiet." One of the other men, younger with a patchy beard, wandered toward the corner where Daniel's cradle sat, partially hidden by a blanket hanging from a rope. "What's this?" he asked, reaching for the blanket. "Storage," Jesse replied smoothly. "Got to make use of every inch of space." The scarred man stood, setting down his coffee cup. "We should be moving on. Thanks for the hospitality." Jesse nodded, relief washing through him. But as they headed for the door, Daniel began to cry from the root cellar below. The men froze. The scarred man turned slowly, his hand moving to his pistol. "Thought you said you were alone." Jesse raised his rifle. "I think it's time for you boys to leave." What followed happened in a blur of violence. The scarred man drew, but Jesse was faster, firing a shot that caught him in the shoulder. The second man lunged at Jesse, knocking the rifle from his hands. As they grappled, the younger one pulled his own gun, aiming it at Jesse. A shot rang out, but it didn't come from the young outlaw's gun. Instead, he crumpled to the floor, revealing Zara standing by the open trapdoor, Jesse's revolver in her hands. Jesse used the distraction to gain the upper hand on his opponent, knocking him unconscious with a blow from a cast-iron skillet. The scarred man, clutching his bleeding shoulder, backed toward the door. "The woman's mine," he snarled. "She took something that belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Jesse replied, retrieving his rifle. "And neither does what you stole from her husband before you killed him." The outlaw's eyes narrowed. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Jesse said and fired. The shot caught the man in the leg, sending him sprawling into the snow outside. By the time Jesse had secured both surviving outlaws to the porch posts, the blizzard had intensified. He returned to find Zara huddled in the corner, Daniel clutched to her chest, the revolver still in her hand. "Are you hurt?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head. "I killed a man," she whispered. "You protected your child," Jesse corrected, gently taking the gun from her trembling fingers. "And me." When the storm broke 2 days later, Jesse rode to the nearest town with the 2 outlaws tied to their horses. The local sheriff recognized them immediately as part of a gang that had been terrorizing the territory for months. The leader, the scarred man, whose name turned out to be Harlan Dobbs, had a substantial bounty on his head. "You and the lady are entitled to the reward money," the sheriff informed Jesse as he locked the outlaws in cells. "It's a tidy sum." Jesse hadn't considered the bounty. The money would make a significant difference to his small ranch. More importantly, it meant that Zara and Daniel were finally safe from the men who had taken Thomas from them. When Jesse returned to the cabin, he found Zara sitting by the fire, her expression thoughtful. Daniel played on a blanket at her feet, gurgling happily. "They're locked up," Jesse announced. "Sheriff says they'll hang for what they did to Thomas and others." Zara nodded, her eyes on the flames. "What happens now?" Jesse took off his hat, turning it in his hands. "There's reward money, enough for you to start fresh somewhere." San Francisco maybe, like you and Thomas planned. Is that what you want, for us to leave? The directness of her question caught him off guard. What I want. Jesse began, then faltered. How could he tell her that the thought of her leaving felt like a physical pain? That in the month since he'd found her beneath that cottonwood tree, she and Daniel had become more important to him than anything else in his life. What I want doesn't matter, he finished. You deserve a choice. A real one, not forced by circumstance. Zara stood, crossing to where he stood. When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I was alone, pregnant, hunted. Then you found me. You said I wasn't alone, that I'd never be. I meant it, Jesse said softly. I know you did. She took his hand in hers. These past months, you've shown me what it means to be truly cared for. Not just protected, but respected, valued. Jesse's heart pounded in his chest. Zara, I'm not ready to leave, she interrupted. I'm not ready to say goodbye to you. Daniel needs a father and I… She hesitated, then continued with newfound courage. I think I need you. Jesse looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't dared hope for, the reflection of his own feelings. I need you too, he admitted. Both of you, you've brought life back to this place to me. Zara smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. Then we'll stay, we'll build something here together. Jesse's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. Together, he agreed and kissed her. Their kiss was tentative at first, both aware of the ghosts between them, Thomas's memory, Jesse's years of solitude. But as Zara's arms wound around his neck, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of a shared future, of healing, of home. Spring came early to Montana that year. The snow melted, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the soil. Jesse used the bounty money to expand the ranch, building a proper bedroom for Daniel and buying a milk cow and additional cattle. Zara planted a larger garden and began teaching Daniel his letters, though he was still too young to understand. As the anniversary of their meeting approached, Jesse became increasingly nervous. Zara noticed his distraction one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Is something wrong? She asked, her hand finding his. Jesse took a deep breath. I've been thinking about us, about our future. Oh, Zara's voice was carefully neutral, though her pulse quickened. When I found you that day, I made a promise that you wouldn't be alone. He turned to face her fully. I want to make that promise official if you'll let me. From his pocket, Jesse withdrew a simple gold band. It had been his mother's, one of the few possessions he'd managed to keep through all his wanderings. Zara Turner, I love you. I love Daniel as if he were my own son. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Zara's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jesse, I would be proud to be your wife. They were married in the small church in town 2 weeks later. Daniel, now nearly a year old, sat in the lap of the sheriff's wife, who had become a friend to Zara. The ceremony was simple, attended by the few neighbors scattered across the territory and some townsfolk who had come to respect Jesse over the years. As they exchanged vows, Zara thought of how far she had come from that desperate day beneath the cottonwood tree. She had lost so much, but gained a love she hadn't known was possible. Their life together wasn't always easy. The Montana Territory was unforgiving, with harsh winters and the constant challenges of ranch life. But they faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each passing season. 2 years after their wedding, Zara gave birth to their second child, a girl they named Elizabeth. Daniel, now 3, was a doting big brother, constantly wanting to hold his sister and show her his favorite hiding spots around the ranch. As their family grew, so did their land. Jesse's careful management and hard work paid off, turning their small homestead into one of the more prosperous ranches in the area. They built a larger house, with rooms for each child and space for the books Zara ordered from back east to start a small school for their children and others nearby. On Daniel's 5th birthday, Zara found Jesse sitting alone on the porch after the celebrations had ended and the children were asleep. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, joining him on the bench. Jesse smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just thinking about how differently things might have turned out, if I hadn't heard you that day, if I'd taken a different trail home." Zara leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I believe we were meant to find each other. That even in our darkest moments, life was leading us toward something beautiful." "You know," Jesse said thoughtfully, I was so alone before you, had convinced myself I preferred it that way. Now I can't imagine life without you and the children." "You'll never have to," Zara assured him, taking his hand. "Remember what you told me? We're not alone now, we'll never be." Jesse's eyes crinkled as he smiled. "Best promise I ever made." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two souls who had found each other against all odds in the vast wilderness of the West. Years later, when their hair had turned gray and their ranch had become one of the largest in Montana, Jesse and Zara would tell their grandchildren the story of how they met of a desperate birth beneath a cottonwood tree, of courage in the face of danger, of a love that had transformed two broken lives into one beautiful family. And as the next generation listened, wide-eyed, to tales of the wild Montana territory of long ago, they understood that their legacy wasn't just the land or the cattle, but the love that had begun with those simple, powerful words. "You're not alone now, you'll never be."